Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of the Time to Calibrate podcast. My name is Marc Levesque, and my co-host today is Brent. Unfortunately, Bob can't be with us today. His real life has gotten in the way of his hobby. Today's special guest is Adam Craniotes, co-founder and president of RedBar Group. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's a real pleasure.
Most welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Quick bit of housekeeping. We started a free Discord community for our listeners and friends to hang out on. There where you can find a news aggregate where you can see all the latest blog posts at a glance. They're sourced from all the major blogs, including Time to Calibrate, and even Bob's latest YouTube videos are in there. There's also a forum for long-form conversations and a watch talk for quick discussions and a whole bunch of other goodies. So if anybody ever wants to join, please reach out and we'll send you an invite. So as this is a watch-related podcast, we start with a wrist check. So let's get that started. Adam, what's on your wrist today?
Well, actually, today I have the Rado, I guess the navy blue ceramic Captain Cook. It's funny because it seems like blue ceramic is in all of a sudden. You've got Zenith, who just dropped a whole bunch of very, very blue watches for their anniversary, Smurf blue. And then, of course, AP is doing their blue nuit. And, of course, I can't afford any of these. But so I felt like this is a nice, affordable way to get in on the action. And I have this irrational love for Rada from when I was a child. So it's a weird, I can't explain it.
Yeah, Rado has a special place in my heart as well. We, the Berks downtown had Rado watches, and there used to be a dive watch called a Dive Star.
Yeah.
Which is fully ceramic with a ceramic bracelet. And the guy was telling us the ceramic stuff is fantastic. It looks great. And this is back in the 90s. So, this is way before it became a hot substance with everyone else. But he told us that he had dropped one once at the store and it hit the counter and it had shattered a lug. And he was like, this is what you have to be careful with ceramic. So
yeah, no, I mean, obviously it's much better now. I think they've made it slightly more ductile, but there's always trade-offs. But Rado does need to get credit for being pioneers in this field.
100%.
And I love that they're still doing it.
Yeah.
Well, we just took a team up to Commodore, actually, while we were in Geneva. There were three of us, and we went to visit the Rado plant, or the Commodore plant, rather, where they do the high-tech ceramic. And I'll tell you, that was one amazing experience.
I'm
when you
sure.
When you look into that plasma oven, and you see this, like you're looking into the warp core from something from Star Trek, and you think, man, this is really phenomenal stuff. And ironically, my son was wearing that exact watch that you have on your wrist today.
Your son has excellent taste.
I will let him know. I will let him. This morning,
You don't have to. He listens to the podcast.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He can probably hear us recording right now. He's out in the living room. So I have on this morning a really interesting story of a watch. This is the Fulcrum 39. Mm-hmm. This is from MK2, one of Bill Yao's creations. And Jake Whitkin from the Covalent Collective had sent this to me back on January the 13th, and the USPS lost it. And we thought, well, I guess I won't be reviewing that watch, etc. And when I got back from Geneva yesterday, there it was, sitting there 3 months, almost to the day.
Wow. That's a happy ending you don't usually get.
It is.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Agreed.
Very, very nice watch.
Well, that's great. Bill Yao is an old friend. Adam, I think you must know him too.
He's actually one of the first people I met at an event I went to years and years ago when I got deep into this hobby, and a real gentleman.
Yeah, I reviewed one of his first, he used to do those Seiko mods.
Yeah.
So I had one totally kitted out with the sapphire crystal, different dial, different hands, with a Jubilee bracelet and all that stuff. I reviewed that. That's got to be 20 years ago plus.
Yeah. No, they're making all of us feel old here, but yeah.
Yeah. He's a great dude. I've got a Bowcroft Element on, the one that I've been posting on Instagram lately. It's got that light blue frost blue dial.
Yeah.
It is hard to believe that they can make a watch this inexpensive with this many little details. It's so impressive. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The bracelet alone has faceted links, the micro adjust clasp, which is now pretty much standard. But I mean, it's like 10 millimeters thin. It's so comfy.
we're in kind of this golden age, I think, for these micro brands, where they're really bringing a lot of value and a lot of interest to the table. One of the things that struck me, and it wasn't just me. I mean, I literally had one of the editors from the Robb Report of all places talking to me, complaining about how expensive everything is now. And this is before, tariffs and all that other stuff, which of course we will not discuss. But it's so I love seeing these guys come in and sort of filling that gap, for the rest of us mortals. Yeah. I'm a lot of things. Yeah. Last time I checked, millionaire was not one of them. So it's nice to be able to still, have a handhold in this hobby, and I can still get something that gives me, that little jolt when I check the time, and I don't have to worry about my kids' education.
So before we pepper our guests with questions, how about a bit of a bio? So Adam's online watch presence started in timezone.com in 2005, as far as I can see.
Oh, I was earlier than that, but yes.
Yes. When they updated the software, we all got new registered. Yeah. I'm in 2003 on the new software. I was there from 97.
I know. But, it was dial up
with the old software. Yeah, dial up and HTML code and.
You've got mail. It was. Yeah.
So with 6,200 posts on there, his presence was definitely felt. He may have managed the site at some point, which we'll talk about later. For a better part of 5 years, he was the editor-in-chief of Revolution magazine. And just over 10 years ago, he co-founded RedBar, where he's currently the president. We recently had William Messina and RJ Broer on the show. They also started participating and eventually playing a part in Time Zone's management. Unfortunately, by the time Adam came on board, or maybe we crossed paths, I don't remember. But I was already writing for Insync magazine and participating on other forums that I helped moderate and eventually sell platform menus. Long story. Most people have heard it already. So it maybe during the Time Zone time, I was moderating the Ball Watch forum on Watch to Seek, and I was moderating it behind the scenes for Jeff Hess on Time Zone, which Time Zone was not aware of. But,
that's fine.
Another day. Yeah.
Jessica, don't listen.
Yeah, or Mike Disher or Michael Sandler at the time, I think.
Yeah.
He's supposed to come on the show, by the way, Michael Sandler. I haven't coordinated.
He's actually the guy that brought me into Time Zone, so love that guy.
Well, Michael and I, before he managed Time Zone, he and I worked on a website called watchzone.net for a guy named Terry Allison III or whatever. This guy's a mental case. We didn't know that at the time. We found out afterwards. Yeah. But we moderated that place and ran it, and eventually sold to timebeat.com. Similar situation as Ashford and Time Zone.
Okay.
We got stock options were worthless, and that's a long story.
Yeah.
But so we've been involved for a while. Can you tell us about your time on that website, on Time Zone, and your involvement with them?
Yeah, sure. So I alluded to earlier, that this was dial-up era when I started, checking out the site. And, for me, it was wonderful because as a child, I loved watches. But, we did not have the internet. I am of that age, Generation X, where we were right on the cusp of all of this stuff. We've seen all the technology come to bloom, but during our formative years, it was still kind of science fiction. So for me to learn about watches, either I had to haunt, the aisles of the Satellite Tourneau on 59th and Madison. Eventually, they got to know me and would take watches out and show them to me. And then there was this international magazine store across the street from my apartment. And I would go there, and the guys there would let me kind of act like it was a library, and I could read all the international, trade publications. That's when I learned that, wait, this watch says its movement is a Valjoux 7750, but wait, this is a whole different company, but the movement says Valjoux. Wait, what's going on here? I thought, every watch has its own thing. And then I started realizing how the industry works. You have movements, then they'll be shared across, blah, blah, blah. So that's how I started. So when Time Zone, when I discovered that, and this was probably around the same time as you, it was maybe the mid 90s, it was this wellspring of information that, was heretofore unavailable to me. All these people, many of them, older than me, who had been collecting for a long time. And it was, it was revelatory. One thing I do remember is, if somebody had access to a scanner, then you'd have this sort of caption in the forum heading, the whatever that said modem burner as a warning. so that you could open, the thread to view the post and the subsequent conversation. But when the picture was downloading, go make a sandwich, maybe take a bath, maybe take a bathroom break. And, and then you come back and then you like see this, kind of blurry picture of a Rolex or something. And you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And so, because I've been haunting, again, the stores, the magazine shop, and now Time Zone, as it started, to grow and technology moved forward, I always sort of view around maybe 2004-ish as sort of a pivotal point, because all of a sudden, we had access to decent digital cameras, we had Wi-Fi, we had, more high-speed internet. So now you can share the photos easily, you can get online easily, the conversations are going smoother. And so I was still on Time Zone then. And I think because of my posting and blah, 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 that was when, I was asked to kind of be like, hey, you seem to know what you're doing. You seem to know watches. Would you like to moderate a forum? And actually, I would say that was probably around 2011 that happened. I don't even remember the exact dates. Maybe earlier than that. Probably was earlier than that, but I don't remember anymore. Now I'm old officially. But and I started with the IWC forum because I was always a big IWC fan. Still am.
With Michael Friedberg, no?
Yeah. And then, and he of course went on to run the official IWC collector forum.
Yep.
And now it's this really lovely guy, Tony, who's doing it. But yeah, so I started with that, and then eventually I was made a global moderator, so that I could kind of oversee, help moderate the whole site. And that's when I was working with William, and of course Michael, and then we moved from there. But it was an interesting time, I think, to be a collector. It was a great time, honestly. You had all the forums. You had Time Zone, you had Watch You Seek, you had Purist Pro, and everybody was learning, and everybody who was there for the right reasons, and I don't mean to sound like a gatekeeper or like, if you want to buy a gold Rolex and impress chicks at the club, like, great. That's what that's what watches mean to you, fine. But, the people who had found these sites and really were engaging just loved horology for horology's sake. And so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Lots of sharing of knowledge and the passion of it, how things worked.
Mm-hmm.
And reviews were so different and detailed back then. It wasn't just, hey, look how pretty this is and let's impress as many people as possible. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I am one of those guilty parties that had a flatbed scanner. I used to scan at 600 DPI.
Oh, man.
That would take forever to do.
Well, like I said,
it was a lot of fun, though.
But that was like I said, that's when you got up and, like I said, you made your sandwich, you took a walk around the block, get some air, and then you come back and, wow.
And my wife thought I was absolutely nuts. Well, she still thinks I'm nuts, but that was
I know. Yeah. Here's to the wives who have been putting up with us all these years.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned before that you were always into watches as a little kid. How did you get your start in that? I mean, a lot of people have their dads were into watches, or they got one for Christmas at some point. What's your origin story there?
It was actually my grandfather. And I should point out that neither my father or my grandfather were into watches. But as a kid, I just always loved watches, always. And so I would spend my summers with my twin sister upstate New York in Binghamton with my grandparents. That's where my mother was from. And, my grandmother would, we would go, there was a local mall, the Oakdale Mall, and they had this store there called Bradley's, which I guess would be akin to like a Target today. So it was affordable. It was a place, she could buy us some clothes and do a little shopping, and, they kind of sold a little bit of everything, but they had a watch counter there. And so I would always just go straight to the watch counter, and they were selling Timex, Casio, Armatron. And of course I liked, the digital watches. That was the thing back then. And so I remember one time I was there, and again, about 7 years old, and my grandfather came up behind me, tapped me on my shoulder, and he said, which one do you want? And I was just shocked, because in my family, you do not get presents unless it's your birthday or Christmas, or maybe you saved a bunch of nuns from a burning building. So I couldn't believe that this was happening. And of course, I'm a child. I don't know how much things cost, but I do know that we don't have a lot of money, and I don't want my grandfather to do something extravagant because it was very clear that my grandmother held the purse strings. So I didn't want him to get in trouble with her. And I chose the cheapest looking watch that was there. And it was a Casio F7. Now I wanted the calculator watch, which I later come to find is like a CA-801. This is how nerdy I am when it comes to this stuff. And I remember he was puzzled. He kind of looked at me like, are you sure that's the one you want? Now, all this did was tell the time. It had one button that a light would come on, not this electroluminescent or LED stuff. It was literally like a tiny, like incandescent light bulb in there.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
At a corner.
like barely lit the thing up. But and I said, no, that's the one I want. And he bought it for me. And I still have it. As a matter of fact, the bracelet, the strap disintegrated years ago. I had a new one put on, and I actually gave it to my son on his 3rd birthday, so that my first watch was his first watch.
That's awesome.
And but then after that, any birthday, I got money, Christmas, whatever, it was always a watch. It went towards a watch. It was always Casio. They get more and more, more features, so to speak. I mean, I had the Melody watch. I had the of course, I got the calculator watch, the data banks. Then G-Shock came out, and then it was all about G-Shock. But that's how I started.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. Yeah. You've just been talking about how long this collecting habit goes back. And of course, today, you've got everything from quote unquote micro brands all the way up to some heavy hitters, some haute horlogerie, etc. What is it exactly that makes you pull the trigger on a watch?
It's something I don't think you can really quantify in words. I always have this thing, where if you look at your wrist and you smile, then you've got the right watch. If you're looking at your wrist and you're happy, and then somebody asks you what time it is, and you go, what? Oh, and then you look again because you weren't looking at the time. You were just happy to have this thing on your wrist. Then, regardless of whether it was, $50,000, $100,000, or $100, you've done well. So I think for me, a lot of it is aesthetics at this point. There was a period, I think everybody goes through this journey, where you finally get to a point where you can buy that really good watch, and 9 times out of 10, it's a Rolex, because they're the best watches in the world. And then you start learning there are other companies that are doing stuff. So you start, branching out, but then you start realizing, ETA movements are everywhere. Solida's everywhere. So now I want to do in-house, which of course is a very silly thing. I feel. And then, you go that route, and then you start realizing that, that's not the end all be all. And then you circle back to, just getting whatever the you want. And so I'm in the get whatever the, language. I'm in the get whatever get whatever you want phase now. So, but yeah, I think it's hard to say it. And a lot of times now for me too, it's I've gotten to know a lot of these watchmakers, at every level of the game. And if I can buy something that's from someone I really know and care about, that makes it more personal. Like if it's a Brew watch, for instance, John Ferrer is one of our RedBar OGs. As a matter of fact, that's how he kind of got into this game. I feel, very paternalistic, shall we say, towards the brand. But if I have one of his watches on, I think about him.
He's such a nice dude too.
There's Ianos, which is a Greek micro brand. And I have their Avisos. I'm actually, testing a couple of prototypes this guy has now. And it was a brand that really spoke to me when it came out. And, again, I think of this guy, and I think of, I'm half Greek. It's little things like that. So,
hey, my wife is Greek, and my kids are half Greek. So, hey, we're related.
There you go. Opa.
You used a phrase earlier in the podcast, the golden age, I think, of affordable watchkeeping. And actually, I think last summer you had used that exact phrase in a post that you put up on Instagram saying, isn't this great that we live in this age, this golden age of affordable or semi-affordable watches. So why is that important?
Well, a big part of RedBar was, founding. And again, I have to say, it was all entirely by accident. None of this was supposed to turn into what it's become. But I liked the idea of getting rid of some of the gatekeeping in this hobby. And so when RedBar kind of kicked off, we had a couple of watch clubs in the city, and they were very exclusive. You had to be, voted in. Your collection had to be at a certain level. And to me, that was just sort of anathema to the whole concept of a hobby like this. And yeah, I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in. So if there's some way I can minimize that for other collectors coming into the game, then I feel like I've done my job. And so I like the idea of people being able to buy great watches that have, a certain, I don't want to say provenance, that implies, age or history or whatever, but from a horological standpoint can make you smile, and you're not breaking the bank. And that's more important than ever. This is a completely ridiculous hobby. Nobody needs a watch. Let's be clear. The reason everyone, has an old Omega or Rolex from their father, grandfather, blah, 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 is because there was a time when a watch was not an affectation. It was a necessity. And so you would get the best watch you could. And then that was your watch. You didn't have a whole collection of them. This is your watch. I'm wearing it every day, and it's a good watch. So whether it was a Timex or Rolex or, God forbid, a Patek Philippe, that was your watch. Nowadays, we're surrounded by time. It's on our phone. I call the 21st century pocket watch. It's on my computer right now. It's in my car. It's on the subway station. So why are we doing this? Because we want to. It's fun. It is a luxury, but it's a luxury that shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg. So I love that concept that you can have a collection and you don't have to be a millionaire, and it's a collection you can be proud of.
Absolutely. Now, as I do with many of our guests, I like to snoop around on LinkedIn and find out a little more about their career. And I noticed that you were copy director at Macy's.
Yes.
Was that watch related as well?
No, that's sort of the irony. Everybody asks, "Oh, you were at Macy's, so you were clearly the watch department or this or that." And no, I was actually copy director for the home store. And so that division, we dealt with furniture, bedding, very boring stuff. That was definitely a job that gave me health insurance and allowed me to feed my family. But trust me, there was no passion there. Although I must say I met some of the best people. And we were all just, cogs in a machine and hated it. But, it was a living.
Yeah, you do what you got to do to make a living.
No, but it was funny because I'd show my kids, like, well, look, here's the catalog that came out. Daddy wrote that. I don't think they were that proud. They didn't care. But yeah.
Well, my kids are impressed. I have more followers than they do on Instagram. So
I wish my kids cared. My daughter, of course, she is the avatar on my Instagram. Years ago, she saw a bug.
I've always wondered about that picture.
Yeah, my daughter was, I think she must have been about 6 years old, and she saw a bug. She hates bugs, and she was crying. We were up at our house in Connecticut, and I remember I was sitting on the back deck with a glass of wine. I was looking out, we have a pond. I'm like, life is good. I don't know how much longer I can keep this house because everything's so expensive, and life now is not so good as I'm ruminating on that. And then my wife just comes out of the house carrying my daughter crying. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And she goes, she saw a bug, and then just plops her on me. And so the photo is literally her lying on me. And I just took a selfie of the two of us with her like, "Rah!" And me just kind of smiling. And I don't know why, but for some reason, when I created this account, however many years ago, that was the face I put there. And now she's like, you owe me money for this. You're using my likeness. She's almost 16. And, for a period there, she really didn't like it. Now I don't think she cares because I'm gross and embarrassing now. So, but yeah, that is my daughter, Lola. She saw a bug.
That's hilarious.
Well, you just told us a really great story there. And in fact, you know what? I view storytelling is probably one of the most important parts about watch writing, actually.
Yes.
And in fact, stories and the stories behind a watch are just as important to me and just as interesting to me as the watch itself. So we just talked about the fact that you were doing copy editing and copywriting and things like that. Did you hone your craft back in those days when you were doing that? Because you have a very distinct voice. It's got a great blend of humor and gravitas. It's not necessarily irreverent. But it is great storytelling.
Well, thank you first of all for that. I've been taking notes because I'm putting this in my bio, gravitas in particular. But well, I was always into writing. I read a lot as a child, and I think a lot of what I read, a lot of humor like Douglas Adams and stuff like that informed a lot of, I think, how I express myself. And then all my jobs, as content management, during the tech boom, and then I worked almost exclusively in advertising. And then I went to Macy's, of course, which was, still a form of in-house advertising, if you will, and always involved copy and writing. So that's the only thing I can do. When I was in college, I was an English lit major, which, of course, is a useless major nowadays. And if any of my kids choose that, hell no.
My son's an English major.
Oh God. Look, it's a step up from philosophy. So, so you got that going for you at least. But no, so writing was something I could do. I can't add or subtract or multiply and divide. Don't ask me to do your my taxes. I'm basically useless in every other aspect of modern life. But I could put a sentence together. So yeah, that was it. And so fortunately, that was a way for me to make a living.
Yeah, like you, I'm a voracious reader. I was a voracious reader until smartphones came around. Kind of put a dent in my reading.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's how I got started writing as well. I used to read book a week or a book every 2 weeks, and a lot of adventure stuff, sci-fi, Douglas Adams, Clive Cussler.
Yeah.
Robert Ludlum. Fun stuff. Just escapism, right?
That's really what it is.
And, and when I discovered timezone.com, like you, I spent a lot of time learning and reading. And it took a year or two before I really started participating. Nowadays, any smartass can come off the internet and go on a Watch You Seek, enter a conversation and just blast people. That wasn't the time. Back then, you spent time learning and researching and making mistakes and people helping you correct and all this other stuff. So I started writing reviews on timezone.com.
Yeah.
And after I had maybe a dozen of them done, I had submitted them to different publications, to International Wristwatch in the UK, in the US, to HR Magazine, to InSync Magazine. And funny enough, International Wristwatch in the UK made me an offer, and so did InSync Magazine.
Love it.
And the InSync one was the more lucrative one, so that's how I got into writing for them. I did that for nearly 6 years.
Wow.
How did you get your start with Revolution? Was it the same way? Did you submit or they'd come after you? And how did you eventually become editor in chief?
It was an interesting story. I'd known Wei for a while. Obviously, just Wei, the founder of Revolution and the Rake. And, we'd see each other at events, and he's actually, lived in New York for a while. His father, I think, was ambassador Singapore to the UN. And so he went to UNIS, the United Nations International School, where my wife went. I think he actually knew my sister-in-law who was there. He's a little older than me, even though he looks like 10 years younger than me. And, I hate him. He's just fit and cool. Great head of hair. I hope you hear this way. And so it was, there was this event, Time to Move. And this was when the Swatch Group basically gave the finger to Basel World. And so they held this big thing in Switzerland where they invited a bunch of, journalists out. And, you kind of toured all of the Swatch Group factories. You went to Blancpain, Breguet, Omega, Glashütte. We did, kind of an offsite because they weren't going to fly everybody to Germany. And, but he was there and, we were talking, and then I guess, they were looking for a new editor. And then he kind of was like, hey, you, what do you think? And it literally was that easy. I'd been writing, for a bunch of publications like you. I was writing for IW, Watch Time. I had a thing with Thrillist, Gear Patrol. So, they knew, that I was writing. And I would be on a lot of these press trips or junkets, for various magazines, never anything consistent. So I was a bit of a known quantity, and RedBar, was already kind of a thing. And yeah, that's how that happened.
Excellent. When you came on with Revolution, Wade wrote, and I need to quote this, that the editor of a watch magazine must be in possession of a powerful, fearless, humorous, deeply passionate, and utterly unique editorial voice. But then he went on to say, he must also be extraordinarily handsome, so much so that he appeals to men, women, and even small animals. And he must have a fantastic beard. So congratulations on that beard, Adam. That's great.
That's pretty much all. That was the only thing that I actually measured up to. Yeah, you're not going to see me on the cover of GQ anytime soon.
But in all seriousness, what do you think, after having done that stint, what is it that makes a successful editor, or more specifically, a successful editor out of watch rooms?
I honestly, it is a lot of those things, maybe without the raw sex appeal. I think I firmly believe that humor should be front and center in everything we do in life, but particularly in writing, and particularly in this industry. As I said before, it's not a necessity. We're not putting men on the moon. We're not curing cancer. We're writing about things that nobody needs, and they cost ridiculous amounts of money. And so you need to have a bit of a sense of humor, I think, when you're covering this. And also, I think humor is a great equalizer. Everybody loves a laugh. Everybody loves, you get that little dopamine hit that comes with that. And so it's a unifying factor. So I definitely believe the humor is a part of that. And then knowledge and passion. And I don't want to throw shade at anybody, and I'm certainly not going to name names because there really aren't any to name. But in this influencer culture that we have nowadays, anybody with, a camera and a mic and a cell phone can become a personality and an expert overnight. And a lot of them, I think, are, doing it for the right reasons. But there's a question to me is, do you have this deep well of knowledge that you're drawing from? Why should I listen to you? What are you bringing to the table, your perspective, that makes you, and I listen to some of these people, they're mispronouncing brands. They clearly want to do this because it's on some level a little glamorous. You get invited to these cool events, you get to travel. But yeah, I don't know. You need a baseline knowledge. You need a little history with this hobby. You need to bring something to the table beyond, a pretty face and a soundbite. I cannot bring the pretty face to the table, so maybe I'm just jealous. But yeah, I think to be an editor, you need to be able to do that, and you need to have the freedom to, I think, ask hard questions. The problem a lot of times in this industry is I view a lot of the brands as kind of jealous prom dates. I used to write a little bit for the automotive industry, and you could go on a trip and test drive this car and write an article that says, that the handling is it's downright dangerous. The brakes are blah, blah, blah. You'll get invited to the next event to test drive the next car. That these are cars, people's lives, whatever. They're fine. Thicker skins. In this industry, if you write, the emperor has no clothes and this watch is, just a piece of crap, they're not going to invite you back. You actually have to tread a bit of a line there. That I don't like. And I think, the magazines, have the power to kind of push back against that. Although I have seen the other side. And again, magazines need to make money. So yeah, it's a strange thing. But I think you need to have a little more editorial freedom than we see a lot of these publications having.
I agree with you 100% with the base of knowledge and the humor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I like to believe that's how I write. I think that the perspective that people...
I laugh at your writing all the time. I'm sorry.
Are you laughing with me or at me?
I'm kidding. But I jest. No, sorry, go on. I just saw an opening. I took it. So.
Yeah, no worries. But I agree 100%. I think that there are a lot of influencers out there that speak with unfounded experience.
Yeah.
And it shows to people who do have experience, but to the general public, it does not.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I believe that people who are reviewing watches should have some experience with other watches in order to tally them against each other and show where there are lackings and where things can be improved, or how they hit it out of the park in certain aspects of the watch that if you hadn't lived with all those other watches, you wouldn't have noticed. And, pictures can only do so much. I agree with you 100%. I love the way you described that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The tail end too of what you said kind of leads me logically to my next question, which is, we've had a lot of really great watch writers on the show, which you are one. And I like to ask them this question because I want to know, what is the role of a watch writer? Like you say, this is not hard-hitting journalism. This is not being implanted in some kind of cell overseas during war zone. But what's the role of that particular individual, even though we know that they have to tread that fine line?
Well, it's a conduit, I think. We get to try on watches. We get to take little deep dives after you sign the agreement that you are responsible for this piece and will return it intact. It's almost living vicariously, and that's how I view it. When I have a piece that was sent to me and trusted to me, and something I cannot afford in my real life, though, but I can convey what that experience is and what it's like to have. And I think a lot of it is that. We talked earlier, about escapism, and then the novels we used to read, and I think Marc and I had similar tastes. It was a lot of science fiction, adventure. For me. And so I think even reading, I still read all the publications, and I'm living vicariously. I'm getting a taste of what it's like to own this fantastic, rare, limited edition, complicated, high horology piece. And that's, for me is, I think that's what you need to do. You're lifting the veil. And, how does the other half live to an extent? And let's be honest, most of us are not buying, MB&Fs and Urworks by the bucket load and, getting our, custom Patek Philippe's and blah, blah, blah. So it's fun. Again, we're not, like I said, we're not doing anything that's really critical to the longevity of the species here. But and in a way, I think that makes it even more human. There's nothing logical about this. Nobody needs a watch, but we want it. We want that little bit of anachronism in our lives. And I think it's because it's this intersection of art, science, technology, craftsmanship, all on your wrist, ticking away meticulously, day in and day out. And it's special. It is. And it's special, I think, also by virtue of its complete superfluousness, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite answers. One of my favorite answers for sure.
So you and Brent just returned from Watches and Wonders in Geneva.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get your takes, both of you, on that show and the concurrent shows near and around Watches and Wonders. Brent, how about you go first on this one? How was your experience?
Well, this year I actually made a conscious effort to spend most of my time at those adjacent shows. I spent at least 3 full days at Time to Watches, meeting with, I think in total, probably 18 or 19 different brands to sit down and have good discussions. And then I spent a day going up to Boncourt and Legnau and interviewing Adrian Bossard and doing the Rado thing. And then we spent about a day at the Beau Rivage. We went to Liseberg, which is another really, really cool, tiny little show down in the Bern region. And, I'm really glad that I did that. Last year, I spent a lot more time at Watches and Wonders. I did go and have some meetings with like Tag Heuer and things like that, but it was just so exciting to see the world of independent horology, like letter or timepieces, Vanguard. These people are just making stuff like they're so wondrous, to look at, and the good complications that they're coming up with. It was a really, really wonderful experience. Not that I didn't enjoy Watches and Wonders. I always do. But it was a little bit scaled back, I felt, this year in some respect. Lots of people went, but it didn't necessarily have the sort of pizzazz that some of those booths had maybe last year. I don't know about you.
Well, that latter part, I definitely agree with you. And I think some of that, this lack of pizzazz, if you will, and not just in terms of the booths, typically, I mean, like IWC built, an aircraft carrier deck one year, this is the kind of stuff we're used to seeing. But I think also the watches that we saw this year, there were no real Hail Mary passes, nothing that was too crazy or out there, but a lot of just really nice watches. Yeah, that's a nice watch. Oh, look, that's a nice watch. Even the star of the show for many people, the Rolex Land Dweller, and here, I've complained for years, when they were at Baselworld, and then now, of course, at Watches and Wonders, they just come out with a new Cerachrom bezel color, and everybody loses their shit. Well, this year they actually made a whole new watch and a whole new movement. So kudos. It's not really my taste personally, but they get credit for that. But even that's kind of safe. So it's an integrated bracelet that plays on the old oyster quartz, yay. But I think it's a reflection of the world. It's a reflection of the global economy. It's a reflection of just some uncertainty. Let's take it easy. We're all waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, of course, at the show, the other shoe did drop in the form of tariffs. We still have yet to see how this will affect the industry. It looks like Rolex has played a role in perhaps getting the Swiss watch industry off the hook. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, the show itself, for me, it's a mixed bag. I've been doing this for, over a decade now, and I'm just tired. It's a lot of walking. It's a lot of work, and when you're done, you might have a brand dinner to go to, but you still need to get back to your hotel, and you might have to file a story. You've got to go through your photos. We have a retoucher that we have to send everything to and then get back to us. And then you get up and rinse, repeat. We're there for about a week. So it's exhausting. But I think the best part, and maybe you'll agree with me, is seeing everybody. It's one place where, when you're part of this industry, on our side, you'll do trips here and there, and you'll see a handful of journalists here, there, whatever. But when you're at, it used to be Baselworld, that's gone, and it was SIHH, now Watches and Wonders. But when you're there, everybody's there. So it's a great opportunity to just catch up with friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and even the people we know at the brands, to see everybody. So that's what I enjoy the most. And I did not actually get an opportunity to go to Time to Watches, so I'm happy to, hear your perspective on that. It's one thing, we have to be a little careful of sometimes. I think, was it the president or the CEO of Rolex last year referred to these other shows as pirates. So if, you want to be invited back, and you have to remember that Watches and Wonders is an invite only scenario, you have to be careful on how you cover the pirates. It used to be they gave you 2 nights at a hotel, which, helped. Geneva's expensive. Then they upped it to 3, and now we get 5 nights. You still are paying for your flights, you're paying, for your room service, blah, 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 but it helps because, we're out of pocket for everything else. I like to say I've got RedBar money. I don't have Hodinkee money. So, yeah, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me too much, but I do like, and I think it's because Baselworld doesn't exist, that now Geneva is really the locus for everything. So, and that's why you can have the Beau Rivage, you can have Villa Saracen, you can have Time to Watch. And I think as somebody who's coming to visit, because now we have the public days, we didn't used to have that. Right. And I think every collector, if you can, you swing it, it's worth going like at least once. And then you can see everything. Now, admittedly, I think for Watches and Wonders as the public, it's kind of glorified window shopping. You're not sitting down and having a one-on-one with the technical director of a brand, but, you get to see the booths, the field, or whatever. You get to, see all the new stuff, but you get to sort of get immersed in that Geneva, horlogerie, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of cool. Yeah.
I thought that with last year's numbers, that when they came out, that all the brands had suffered a little bit to a tune of 10 to 25% below their targets.
Yeah.
And this year they take a swing for the fences, and Rolex was the only one that came out with something that was remotely a swing for a fence. I was disappointed, but at the same time, I'm kind of relieved, because every year when all these shows come around, there's always one that I really want.
Yeah.
And then, but this year there's
just say
apart from maybe the
saved you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The only one that I'm actually really curious about is the Pelagos Ultra, because I'm a dive watch guy and I like big watches still, and
it's really nice.
I can't wait to see that one. But yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in
But
person.
It's not. But again, it's a variation on a theme. If you've held a Pelagos, you're basically 85% there. In terms of the new one.
For me, the little things, right? The dome crystal on Pelagos. I got to see that in person. I think that's going to look really, really good.
The stepped Rihad is nice, and then and that little bit of teal, that little bit of blue, kind of.
Yeah.
It was definitely one of my favorites. For me though, it was the Brad Pitt on Juror. That green dial and the gold indexes and handset, it actually had me thinking, what can I sell to make this happen?
They're beautiful, but I think that the pricing's
insane.
It's out to lunch, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I keep counting on maybe I get that friends and family discount, but it never really materializes, and it never does for the hard to get pieces. So no, that watch will remain, just out of reach. But that was the one I think for me that kind of was like, really?
Yeah.
You guys had to come out with that. Don't you know my financial situation? Work with me, people.
Yeah, exactly. Aren't you designing these for me?
Come on.
So as someone that's been in the space nearly as long, or probably longer than I have been, and has gone to many of these big shows, unfortunately, I've never been to any of those except for the Canadian ones. Can you tell us how those shows have changed over the years? I mean, apart from Swatch and Breitling pulling out and all that stuff and moving to Geneva, what's the difference between the old days and now?
Well, what was interesting is, so back when it was SIHH, it was a very exclusive show.
That was stuffy.
And it was stuffy. There was a dress code. You had to wear a suit. Me in a suit is hilarious. It's like, will the defendant please rise? Clearly my lawyer bought this to make me more sympathetic to the jury, and it's not working. They're definitely putting me away. But so there was that. But with that stuffiness, there was a measure of civility that was entirely lacking from Baselworld. So there were fewer shows. I mean, it was really a Richemont game at that point. So you could kind of take your time. You could see everybody. You could sit and, they feed you. There's lunch. There's, some wine. There's champagne. There's beer. And again, there's that sense of like, I've made it. I'm in the circle because they have allowed me to be here. Even if I'm only getting 2 nights at a hotel, and 2 nights is not enough to cover the show. So then you're out of pocket for an Airbnb or, staying at a hotel. I stayed at the Edelweiss once, which is above like a fondue restaurant. And the place, you just come out of there smelling like cheese. Everybody knew, like, don't go there. But if you didn't get your reservation soon enough, you were stuck there. We were all just gagging the whole freaking time. But yeah, so there was that aspect to it. And then, of course, Baselworld was just a free-for-all because that was a public show also. So you did have a moment where you could go and, kind of have the more media-centric part, but it was so big and sprawling. And the prices, I mean, there's stories of this happening, and it's true, where people would go to a restaurant to eat, and they get their menus, and the people would come out, they take all the menus, these are the wrong menus. And they give you the new menus, which the prices are twice as high. A closet of a hotel room was like 750 Swiss francs. And basically they priced themselves out of business because people were complaining and the brands were complaining about, the gouging just to participate in the show and what kind of return they were getting on it. But that was, again, part of the vibe. this the craziness of that show contrasted with the genteel, more upper class, upscale feel of SIHH. But with Baselworld imploding in on itself, and again, they did it to themselves and they deserved it. Now the only game in town is the rebranded SIHH Watches and Wonders. And now there were 60 brands there this year. You can't see everything. And of course, with the rise of influencers, the number of people who are attending the show, being invited, has grown. So now it's not so civilized. You got to fight to get a seat to eat. If you want to, get some lunch, the press lounge is always packed. If you want to get a seat there, plug your computer in, relax. You're running left and, it feels a little bit like the Baselworld chaos and energy has kind of crept into, for better or for worse, into Watches and Wonders. And it's by necessity.
A whole bunch of people with selfie sticks videotaping themselves in front of booths, and oh god.
But this is the future. I mean, this is what people want. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I don't have a podcast. I don't film myself. I have a face for radio anyway, but it's you got to roll with it. But definitely the vibe has changed a lot. But but I'm still honored to be coming back. It's still a fun show, as exhausting as it is. And Geneva is a great city. And this was the first time I was there. That was actually beautiful.
Oh, it was so beautiful.
Remember, SIHH took place in January. So we were always there in winter. And it was freezing and snowing or raining and windy and cold. And And I heard last year was nice. I didn't go last year. I actually injured my leg. And trust me, this is one show where you need both legs working. So this for me was honestly in the decade plus that I've been regularly going to Geneva, that I actually had a chance to be outside in a t-shirt and take photos, sit by a fountain, look at the jet, in Lac Le Mans. And it gave me a renewed appreciation. I was starting to
we're
sour.
Canadian, so winter over there is fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Not for me. Not for me. So that was a nice experience. But yeah, I think, it's the show has evolved, and it's a reflection of the times. It's a reflection of the consolidation in the industry to a certain extent. And also I think that there's more access thanks to technology and what have you. It's always been a very, like I said earlier with RedBar, I want to get rid of some of the gatekeeping. And that's still a part of, I think, Swiss horology. Who are the right people? Who do we want representing us? Who do we want owning our watches? But that's expanding now. And the show is a reflection of that.
So you just brought up RedBar again. Maybe we'll switch gears a little bit. To somebody who's new to the world of watches, or maybe somebody who's listening to the podcast and is just getting into this sphere, it might seem that RedBar itself is a little bit of a secret society. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about it? What was your vision in the early days, and has it come to fruition? Is it what you always wanted it to be?
I'll answer the last question first, which is an emphatic yes. It is what I wanted it to be. And I say that without knowing what I wanted it to be when it started, because it started by accident. It was me and another collector, this guy, Dr. Jeffrey Jacques. We met on Watch-You-Seek forum, the Kobold Watch forum. And there's a lot going on, a lot to unpack. That's a whole episode. And yet I believe it, because he's still a good friend of mine. And honestly, RedBar and Kobold are very intertwined because of that connection. So the doc and I were both members of that forum. We own Kobolds, and Mike was coming to town, and he just sent out a general thing. If anybody wants to meet for lunch, I'll be, this Pastis, this really, storied restaurant in the meatpacking district. And I'd love to meet you. Now it's wow, it was an opportunity to meet a watchmaker, a owner of a company. I own one of his watches. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. So I remember sitting at the bar. I got there a little early, and, I ordered a Bloody Mary, and then this guy is sitting next to me, and I look, and he's wearing a Kobold. It's okay, well, obviously he's here for the same reason. And then it turns out it's Lich MD, because that was his tag on the forum. And so I introduced myself, and then I've always gone under my last name, Craniotes, who's you're out here. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're Jeff. Oh my God, did we just become best friends? And Mike showed up. There's a couple of other people there. We had this lovely lunch. He's actually just a wonderful human being in person. Obviously people can say whatever they want about what he's been doing since or what have you, but I'll just say in person, a genuinely nice, enthusiastic human being. And at the end of that, the doc and I are walking to the subway. We got to go back to work. Turns out, where he practiced was a couple blocks away from the Dark Tower, which is what I refer to Macy's headquarters as. A lot of people don't realize if you look above the flagship department store, there's actually a building above it, and that's where all of us are situated. And so I thought, every time that I talk about watches to people in my life, family members, friends, their eyes start to glaze over. And then they're sorry if they ask me, hey, that's a nice watch. And I get into this whole story. But here's somebody who actually cares. So I say, well, what if we hang out? Maybe once a month, talk about watches. Great idea. So I found this bar that was sort of equidistant between his office and my office. It happened to be this dive bar in Koreatown, above a Korean restaurant run by this very eccentric woman named Sai. And the bar was, of course, called RedBar. And so the doc and I started meeting there once a month, and we post, on Watch Time, or Watch You Seek, what we talked about or the watches that we were wearing. And then other people started saying, hey, that's a lot of fun. You guys are in the city. Can I join? Sure. So the two of us became 3, became 5, became 10. Now we're meeting every 2 weeks. I'm sending out emails. And people were always saying, like, well, is RedBar going on this week? Are we doing RedBar? RedBar's coming. And so to me, it just became RedBar. Eventually, Sai sold the bar, moved back to Korea, and we started meeting at another bar in Koreatown called Ichiyumi. But again, the name stuck, RedBar. So I just kept it. And actually, some of the bartenders from RedBar went over to Ichiyumi. So we still had like some of the same people that we were seeing. And that's where we spend most of our time. Unfortunately, COVID, that bar shut down. We meet somewhere different now. But it was also during this time we started posting, under the account RedBar Crew, which was suggested to us by this member, Joe. Like, we'll call RedBar Crew because there were a lot of red bars. So we needed something different. And then other people started seeing, hey, I tune in every week because now we started meeting every week. And I love seeing the photos. It looks like everyone's having fun. I don't have that where I live. How can I get something like that started? Well, it's not rocket science. Just find some like-minded people, find a bar, hang out. Bob's your uncle, done. And what was interesting is that, well, can I call it RedBar? I was like, sure. I have a job, I'm not doing this for fun. Go ahead. And so I think our first chapter was actually RedBar Chicago. And I think our second was probably RedBar Toronto, believe it or not. And so it started growing from there. And it wasn't until I think 2014, 2015, that my friend Kathleen, who's now my business partner, and I'd known her for years, going back to the first tech boom. And she lived in Los Angeles for a while, but then moved back to New York. And she started seeing all this watch stuff I'm posting, wanted to come out, see what this is all about with her then husband, Adam Moore. They are no longer together, but, of course, he's a photographer of note within the industry. And I remember she said, well, look, we want to come out, but, we don't really have fancy watches. But Adam collected a lot of swatches. So they were testing us. They came out, he brought all of his old swatches to see if, we were snobs or not. And everybody lost their collective minds over the swatch collection. And then she's like, all right, you guys are cool. And I think she went from 0 to 60 in like 2.5 seconds. All of a sudden, she's got like JLC, Blancpain, Kathleen doesn't do anything by half measures. And she is an insanely intelligent and passionate person. And then it was with her and James Lambden, who's been a member since the beginning and a friend of mine for years, even before he started Analog Shipped and I started RedBar. And again, we met through Watch You Seek. And we decided, let's try to rein this in a little bit. Let's incorporate it, Let's, trademark the name. Let's get list of rules, regulations, very loose. First rule, of course, is no assholes. And that remains true. And then let's start, trying to kind of regulate how we're growing. And, from there to here, now we have 95 chapters around the world. The only continent we're not on is Antarctica, and I'm working on that. All I need is just, some scientist in McMurdo Station to just grab a penguin and hold up a sign like that says RedBar Antarctica, and we're good to go. But the one, common thread, through all of our chapters is really that bit of inclusivity. Like everybody's welcome. We're not measuring your wallet. We're measuring your passion. Come with a Swatch, come with a Seiko, come with a Longa Zightwork Lumen. It doesn't matter. Just be prepared to share. Be prepared to learn. But the second somebody looks at a watch, that's gross. What is that? Get out. We're not for you, clearly. Because again, I want everybody to have the same access that I now have, but I remember when I didn't have it. But if you're a member of RedBar, then you're a member of every RedBar. And what we found is that a lot of great friendships have been made. I think we have 3 marriages under our belt now too. We have people whose career paths, have changed that are now part of the industry, in high positions. And that makes me so happy, that RedBar has been a catalyst for so many people in their lives, and not just, the watch part of it. So yeah, in that respect, it's gone beyond what I ever thought it could be. And we also, and we've seen the rise of a bunch of watch groups now. RedBar is not the only game in town. By virtue of our size, I think it's, we're the one people think of, but, we've seen a lot of other watch groups come together. And I'd like to think a lot of it is because they saw what we were doing and said, hey, and there's room for everyone. So, when I see this going on in the industry, this trend, that also makes me happy.
Yeah, you mentioned Michael Cobalt before, and I had just brought out some memories. Before there was any controversy with the gentleman, he and I go way back, and I reviewed for InSync magazine his Pittsburgh watch, the one that he was working with Gerd R. Lang from Chronoswiss. They used one of their cases, and it was a dial that they collaborated on, and that was very different from anything else that he was producing at the time, and I loved that watch so much. And I wound up interviewing him as well later on for my website way back in the day. But I did get in touch with him recently. He had posted something about, I don't remember, something about fire engines. And he
was bringing fire engines to Nepal.
To Nepal, yeah. So we were talking, and I invited him to come on the podcast to discuss what's going on now with his life and his company and all that. So he should be on at some point. But that's really cool.
Yeah,
Now, I have questions for you regarding how RedBar functions. Now, I've attended a few of the events, including the one in Montreal, where we were both at, and unfortunately, neither of us
really got to talk. It was a busy night.
Because it was a busy night. We were both being pulled in several directions. But how does it work? I mean, there were drinks there that paid for by someone. There was food there that was paid for by someone. How do the brands fit in? Because the one in Montreal, we had Studio Underdog, Fears, and Christopher Ward. How does that all work?
Well, first of all, a typical RedBar gathering is just, we have a chapter head, a leader, and then they will schedule, typically at least once a month they meet, maybe once every 2 weeks or so. Again, COVID changed everything, not necessarily for the better. But you meet regularly, but it's at a bar and everybody pays their own way. You're really just there to hang out, have fun, share your watches, have some conversation, be around like-minded people. When we do events with brands, though, that's when they come in and then we'll say, all right, well, if you want to throw down with us, we'll pick a venue, we'll set it up for you, but, you're paying, basically. And what you're paying for, of course, is access to our members and to the people who, are basically going to open their wallets and buy watches. We don't guarantee you sales, and, that's up to you. But so what you went to there was a sponsor. We were doing a road trip. So some brands will work with, and they'll identify cities that they want to kind of visit or be in or have more of a presence in. And then, and we set that up for you. And of course, there's a modest fee that goes back to RedBar or HQ, so to speak, that allows us to keep the lights on. Like I said, nobody's getting rich here, but I feel like we're still bringing the gospel to the people. But how it runs, of course, is very loose. We do have certain guidelines you have to follow. In one instance, one chapter was starting to get a little snooty. People were complaining. We had to go in and change the leadership to make it a little more egalitarian, to go, with how we wanted to run things. I don't know if there were any hard feelings there ultimately. But I firmly believe that you know better what plays in Peoria than I do. So how a chapter runs in New York is going to be very different from how one runs in Miami or Berlin, or Dublin or wherever we are. And I trust you as boots on the ground to figure out how to make it work for your people. And it's only, if we start getting complaints, then we'll go in and regulate. But honestly, the people who want to run these chapters are doing it for the right reasons. And the people who come out are coming out for the right reasons. It's actually been, surprisingly easy in that respect. You would think there are a lot of egos here. There's a lot of money being spent, but no, people, genuinely love this hobby and genuinely love the camaraderie that they get from it.
Yeah, we have I won't say a problem, but the Montreal chapter is not running as well as it probably should.
Well, then you got let me know, and we'll talk to them and try to move that in the right direction. And
so what's involved in becoming a chapter head?
Well, a lot of people reach out to us. I'm in the city. I want to get something set up, and we don't have it. How do we go about that? And look, it's the internet. We could do a little bit of a deep dive, figure out who you are, what you're all about. Then we'll do a Zoom call. Figure out where are you from, what are your hobbies, like how did you get into this, what do you expect from this, how would you set this up, and if the person, passes the smell test, get started. You can set up, we have a little template. You can put together the logo. You get your Instagram page set up, and, we'll promote it on our main feed to help you get started. And then, you build it. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you got 3 people coming out, fine. That's how we started. And eventually you build it up. Basically, we want to be where people want us to be. Believe it or not, we have RedBar Halifax. They actually have a good time. I didn't even know that was a place. So
I've been there. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I looked into it. I'm like, wow, now I have to go. But yeah, that's how that works. But of course, again, if there are issues, with how it's being run, we want to hear that. And then, we talk to the people, and typically that's all it takes. Like, hey guys, this isn't working. Can you fix that? Can you fix that? And then 9 times out of 10, like, oh shit. Yeah. I didn't think about that. Yes, we'll do that. We want people to have fun.
There's no investment on the part of the chapter head or anything, or there's no buy-in, or
no, we do not. Yeah. We do not charge members. We do not charge chapter heads. It's almost like the moderation, scenario on the old websites. You're volunteering your time to do this. And there's some benefits, obviously, tangible and intangible to being a chapter head in terms of, the city that you operate in. It certainly opens doors at boutiques and brands and stuff like that. But yeah, again, we appreciate that you're taking time to do this. So, whatever costs there are, we'll bear those. But typically, yeah, it's really just being someone who can rally folks. You need a little bit of charisma. But I think once the people start coming and they start having a good time, it runs itself.
So, outside of RedBar, you're involved in so many things. And one of the things I think is most interesting is that you've been selected yet again as a juror for the relatively new Louis Vuitton Watch Prize. Now, can you just tell the audience a little bit, because it is so new, what this award is about and why it's exciting to you?
Well, it was the Arnault family. Of course, we know that Bernard Arnault, being the patriarch, own LVMH. And so the brands under their purview are Hublot, Zenith, Bulgari, Tag Heuer. And of course, they have Louis Vuitton's, own namesake brand. And so I think one of the goals, maybe more cynically, is to shine more of a light on Louis Vuitton's watchmaking bona fides. And so Jean Arnault, who's one of the numerous Arnault progeny, all of whom I've got to say, when it comes to Nepo babies, these kids are actually really smart. Like, dad made them go to school. Like, they're educated, they're committed, they're actually doing stuff. Like, if my son and daughter can be half as industrious, it's one instance where honestly, I don't hate the whole silver spoon thing. It seems like Bernard has raised some good kids, and they all seem to, they want to be a part of the company and they want to work. And so, ostensibly, this is the brainchild of Jean Arnault, who's been running Louis Vuitton and Le Temps de Fabrique, or Fabrique du Temps, sort of higher end brand under them. And the notion was to encourage independent watchmaking. And so, you can submit, as a watchmaker, as the owner of a company, a timepiece that we will then judge. And if you win, you get, I think it was like $150,000 prize, and then you get a mentorship within the Fabrique du Temps watchmaker. And so for smaller independents, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. Not only, the money is fine, but $150,000 isn't going to change, much of anything. But I think it's the exposure to the wider community, and also within, just the watchmaking acumen within Louis Vuitton. And so it's interesting. I think, Raoul Page won last 2 years ago, or was it a year ago? I don't remember time. Time is, we're talking about watches, but I don't understand time. And he's a watchmaker I followed for a while, but to see him win and then to subsequently see how his profile has been raised has certainly been gratifying. And he definitely deserved it. And honestly, now I can't wait to see who the candidates are for the upcoming one. And I will say that, the criteria that we have to go through, it takes some time. This is, it's, there's a lot to consider. But it is, it's a fun, and it's an honor, obviously, that they selected me for the inaugural one, and it's an honor to be selected again. So we will be doing the final judging in February.
That's excellent.
And then that's what we'll announce the winner.
Fantastic. You're also a member of the GPHG Academy, and I'm not sure how much our audience knows about the selection and voting process of the GPHG Awards. So maybe you could explain also a little bit about what the role of the Academy is in that process and why it was added to the awards almost 2 decades after they were founded.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when they asked me to be a part of it, and it was, it was the first round, so to speak. And I didn't, I knew what the GPHG was. I didn't really know what they needed from me or any of the other people. And now, of course, it seems like everybody and their grandmother's a member. As a matter of fact, I think my grandmother is a member, and she's been dead since 92, I think. So that was a good get for her. But I think the voting, it's very similar. We recommend watches that we think should be up for the various categories. Unlike the LV Watch Prize, there's a dozen categories, for different watches: men's watch, women's watch, chronographs, high-end watchmaking, complications. And you will select that. What's interesting, though, is that you have to buy into the GPHG if you're selected. So there's some brands who are just like, I'm not paying you guys to be part of this committee. So you can nominate me, but we're not going to give you a watch. We don't care. But most brands, it's still prestigious, to win. So they'll participate in that. And once they have selected, based on our suggestions, who the finalists are for each category, then as an Academy member, you get to go in. You've got a page, that's for you, that you can select who you think in each category should win. And it's, it's a ranking, like, well, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, number 4. And it is, it's a little time consuming. They definitely are having you dot the I's and cross the T's. And then, of course, in November, they will have the award ceremony. And what they do is they'll select a final jury of experts, who will then go in and sit with all the watches and tally them up, and then they have a big old ceremony at used to be the Kempinski, I guess now it's the Fairmont Hotel. I went one year. It was actually a lot of fun, a lot of French speaking. I don't speak French, and yeah, but I mean that's what that is. But I still think it's it's a big part of the industry, and it's certainly an award that a lot of people want to win. And that's how that works, though.
Yeah, I do speak French. If the GPHG wants to reach out, I'm here.
There you go. Yeah, I don't know how I don't know how that you get selected. I mean, again, it seems like anybody can be a part of it. Maybe you have to be recommended or something.
I don't know. Maybe it's like the Masons. You have to be invited.
I guess, which again is not how RedBar operates, but they have not asked me for advice on how to be a part of this.
So Adam, a little birdie told me that I have to ask you about the JLC Master Compressor Diving Alarm Navy SEALs story. Oh. So for those who haven't heard it before, what's the deal with this watch?
Well, it's funny. It's I think it came out in, I want to say 2010, a while ago. So JLC, launched at SIHH a line of watches that were allegedly designed in conjunction with or with advice from Navy SEALs.
I remember that.
And one of the, as it turns out, it was true. Then they had watches that, went through BUDS training, went on a couple of missions. And they sort of took the feedback and then, improved the watch. And what we wound up with, of course, was the Navy SEALs diving alarm. And they had, I think, a chronograph version, a time-only version. And so they decided to do a limited edition to go along with this, which is called the Incursion. So unlike the standard version, which was, naked titanium, ceramic bezel, and ceramic was still, kind of a cool new material to be using back then. So they came out with one with a gray DLC case and like yellow highlights. They, instead of the logo on the dial, remember, because it's the alarm, the disc would turn. So if you set the alarm for a specific time, all of a sudden the JLC logo and writing would be upside down, which I actually think is kind of cool. But here what they did is they etched it underneath the crystal and then filled it in. So it was sort of floating. I thought that was a cool effect. And they had 19 in black PVD with orange highlights, and then 62, which were the gray with yellow. I have the gray yellow one. And so 1962 is the year that the SEALs came into existence. And so they did this whole event, out in Coronado, which I was not invited to, even though I bought the watch. And I bought mine in conjunction with my friend Luke Tanney, who was actually the third member of RedBar. And it was interesting because we had the watches delivered to us before they were actually released. So we were not allowed to, photograph or post about them. And so, but we still, we went over, he has this wonderful backyard, which most people in New York City do not have. And so we, smoked cigars and drank brandy and had this big watch opening thing. We had to hide it from his wife. He pretended that I bought the watch. It was just for me because she was going to yell at him. Of course, I had to lie to my wife about it because she was going to yell at me. And the president, the U.S. president of JLC at the time was Philippe Bonnet, who's now the head of Panerai. And so he was the one who kind of gave us the green light to have the watches and was like, please do not let the cat out of the bag until, we can launch it. And I'm actually looking at it right now. I still have that watch, and I'll never sell it. And yeah, look, this is not a Rolex or a limited edition Patek or something. I don't know how much more, if it is, worth now than it was when I bought it, but it's one of those watches that for me is very much a milestone. Aesthetically, I love it. I also love, unlike what Panerai is doing now, all the logos and crap are on the back. I'm not a Navy SEAL. I have not gone through that stuff, so I do not want a trident on the front of my watch. It's just generally a very handsome, functional watch. And of course, the alarm mechanism, which uses their hanging gong setup, instead of buzzing, say like a Vulcan cricket, it actually rings like a bell. So it's a wonderful movement, and it still keeps great time. I've not had it serviced. It uses the master compressor technology for the crown. So there's actually like a gasket, and you twist it, and it sort of presses the crown in. It's not a screw down crown. And the overall design to me is something I think that's interesting, because JLC now is sort of, I think, been pigeonholed into sort of the heritage brand for Richemont. And so we see a lot of the brand, the models hew to sort of the classic designs, more vintage designs, whereas this era, which I call the Magali era after their head designer, was more forward looking. It was sort of like, what is JLC today versus yesterday? So the cases are more modern, as opposed to sort of retro. So yeah, it's a fun watch. It's one that I don't think JLC will ever make again in spirit, and so I kind of like that aspect of it too. But yeah, that's the story behind that one.
Unless they make a reversal for the Navy SEALs.
Oh God, if only. That would be really funny. Well, people don't realize the Reverso is actually probably the world's first purpose-built sport watch.
Yeah.
When you think about it, I mean, it was designed, to play polo, and which is a very physical, demanding sport. And now it's interesting because now it's a dress watch. But yeah, it's supposed to be worn in anger, so to speak.
Now, Bob usually asks this question. I know he loves this question. What is next for your collection? Is there something that you are jonesing for or lusting for that you do not have yet?
Well, obviously that Brad Pitt IWC.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've reached a point where I think I've got a lot of the pieces realistically that I can have. I stay in my lane, as I say a million times. I'm a lot of things. Millionaire is not one of them. And having two children and living in Manhattan certainly limits, what I can buy. I think, in the near term, there's not a whole lot I'm going to be looking at, especially with my son in college, which costs more than I thought it would.
I have two in college. In Canada, it's cheaper, but it's still a lot.
Yeah. It's that's, again, a whole other conversation. Let me think. Honestly, it's really that Ingenieur, but then what that's got me thinking is I used to have the Ingenieur reference 3227. That came out in 2005, and that was almost a return to form, to the Genta design Ingenieur that, of course, the new model plays upon, but it was a very brutal and tough watch. It was thick, it was anti-magnetic and shock resistant and water resistant, and it looked like nothing else. And part of me is sort of like, maybe I could get another one of those. I sold it stupidly, of course, to fund I don't even remember what, but yeah, some reason the Ingenieur has got me thinking things. So yeah, maybe that.
I had one a same era of yours, but it was a GMT version.
Yeah.
And it was brutal is the exact right word for it.
Yeah.
It was 42 millimeters with like 26 millimeter lug opening or whatever. It's not opening, but it's integrated bracelet. It wore like a cuff.
It felt
indestructible.
It was quite a watch. You knew you were wearing it. It wasn't uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, there's no escaping it.
But it had a certain presence. And I think it wasn't terribly successful. For the brand. Hence, they moved on and they sort of went back to older designs. But it's still a watch, I think, that has sort of a cult following now. One way or another, I think another Ingenieur is in my history, is in my future.
And lastly, what does the future hold for Mr. Craniotes and RedBar?
Well, like I said, I just want to get on Antarctica, and I think then I can die a happy man.
Well, now with this podcast, it's going to make it happen, right?
Hey,
there's so many people listening.
Seriously, this is why I do this. Obviously I want to continue to work with the brands that we work with. We do some behind the scenes stuff with them that, we can't really talk about. But I want to continue doing some of that stuff. But I just want us to be where people want us to be. So if you want a RedBar chapter and you're living where there isn't one, reach out. We would love to hear from you. And just to keep bringing the watches to the people. It's again, it's a ridiculous hobby, but there's something very human about it. And in this crazy, mixed up, upside down, topsy-turvy world, this is a fun way to escape, even if it's just for a couple of hours every other week. And there's value in that, I feel.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being our guest today, Adam.
It's my pleasure.
Really appreciate it. We know how valuable your time is. And we appreciate your generosity.
Thank you so much.
The Time to Calibrate podcast is out every 2 weeks. If you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, or anything, you can email us at timetocalibrate@gmail.com. If you have a moment, we'd love for you to like, review, and subscribe. Every little bit counts. And Time to Calibrate podcast is available everywhere you get fine podcasts. Goodbye for now. And until next time, T2C out.